Well, that was totally unfair, Kirby. You got me crying before I even started. Thank you so much. I love you, my dear. Well, I did not come from a family of readers. I came from a family of people who love math. My dad was an engineer, my mom was an accountant, and my sister is a computer programmer. And then there was me, and I loved words. When I talk to students, I always like to start with this slide right here that my mom saved a piece of my first grade writing. And here it is. And I love to show it to kids for two reasons. The little ones, they see it and they think, that looks familiar. The older kids, who sometimes by the time they get to be 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, have convinced themselves they are not writers anymore, look at this and say, I could do that. So it puts us on even playing field right away, and I just love to show it when I'm talking to kids. Now, I know that you have writers in your classrooms, and I want to tell you the 4 things that I tell kids that helped me to become an author, so that when you're supporting them and you're a teacher or a mom or a librarian, these are the 4 things that I did as a child that really mattered, that helped me on the way. The first one was that I was a reader. I loved to read. I read all kinds of books. I read fabulous, great books, and honestly, I read some crap. And I learned from both kinds. Sometimes we get so anxious for them to discover the best literature only that we don't allow them to see maybe the things that aren't so good that they can compare to. But hey, I even bought from the Scholastic book flyer, I even have it at home, the unauthorized biography of David Cassidy. I have that book at home. And it also helped make me a reader. These are some of my very favorite books, though. And I love when I show this slide to children because there's a gasp. Everybody recognizes at least one book on that list. And they are so happy, even those jaded old 8th graders, they look up there and they see one of those books that they loved as a kid, like Frog and Toad, and this huge smile comes over their face. I think we can love books our whole life, but there's something special about those first books, isn't there? That we carry them with us for our whole lives. And these are some of the books that I carry with me. And those of you who are librarians, I'll tell you an awful story about Madeline at the bottom there. That was the only book that I was ever tempted to steal from the public library. I didn't do it because I knew my mother would kill me. But we didn't have a bookstore. I grew up in a very tiny town in New Hampshire, a very rural place. We did not have a bookstore. And even if we had one, I don't think my mother would have taken me to it. It just wasn't something that, she understood very much. So I got most of my books from the public library, which I used to go to by myself, and from the Scholastic book clubs, because my teacher would send the flyers home. And my mom, even though she didn't really understand my love of reading, she supported that in me and let me buy some books from there. But I remember with Madeline, I got it from the library, and I wanted to keep it so badly. I remember having the thought that if I hid it under my bed, she might have to buy it, and then I could keep it. So I didn't actually, but that was one that I wanted so badly. I think it's not only something that we like to borrow books, but we love to own them. And that ownership in me was very early. I remember the first word I ever learned to read, and that word was look, L-O-O-K. It was in a Dick and Jane book, and I was sitting in first grade with a book on my knees. I can still see myself in that little tiny chair. It was such an important moment for me. And I looked down, and all of a sudden I had an epiphany that L-O-O-K was always and forever going to be look, whether it was in a book, if somebody wrote it on the chalkboard, if I got it in a note, it was always look. And the world opened up to me in that moment, and I thought, there is a system to learning to read, and that was so freeing, because it wasn't just magic. I could learn to read. But soon after that happened, something kind of sad happened. I showed my mom my favorite picture book. I brought it to her, and she'd always read it to me, and I asked her to read it to me, and she said no. She said, now that I could read to myself, I needed to do that to get practice, and I was heartbroken. I even remember the book. That was it. I don't think it won any awards, but it did for me. My mom saw reading like a set of skills, just like shoe tying. And once a child can start to do it on their own, you don't really help them if you do it for them. And that's how she saw reading. But you and I know that it was not her decoding skills that I wanted in that moment. I wanted to sit next to her. I wanted to hear her beautiful voice read the words. I wanted to be able to just lose myself in the pictures. But she never read to me again. But there were people in my life who did not stop reading to me, and that was many of you. My teachers. My teachers kept reading to me, and it is my teachers who I became a writer with. I remember one of my favorite teachers, it was in 3rd grade, and she read to us every day. She was very, very young. I think it was only her 2nd year of teaching, but I adored her. And she would read every afternoon, and she let us draw while she read, which was unusual and so fun. So she would have a novel, and she'd be reading through, and we'd be sitting at our desks and just drawing. And I remember one day she was reading a book called Hurry Home, Candy. And it's a book about a dog who gets separated from his family, spends the whole book trying to get back to them. And Mrs. Kitt was a great lover of animals. And so I'm drawing, listening to her read, and all of a sudden, she stopped in the middle of a sentence. And I looked up to see why, and she was crying. And I think I became a writer in that moment because I could not believe that a book had that kind of power to bring this beloved person in my life to tears. And now as an author, teachers will come up to me sometimes and they'll say, oh, I was reading Rules or one of my other books and I started crying in front of the kids. And I say, oh, please don't feel embarrassed about that. You don't know what happened because of that. You may have created a writer right in that moment, because that's what happened for me. I have a series called Hot Rod Hamster, and we have some new early readers for that book, and the very first one is dedicated to Mrs. Kitt, who taught me to love reading. The second thing I did as a child that really helped me to become an author was to write. It really takes a lot of practice to become a writer. And children don't always understand that. They expect to practice with things like instruments and sports and math facts and things like that, but they think somehow writing isn't work. You sit down and it just magically appears, and it just is not like that. It takes an awful lot of practice. One of the nice things for me, though, is I can practice anywhere. I write outside quite a bit when I'm collecting details. The top picture, I am on a ferry when I was working on Touch Blue. I taught in a very tiny school on an island in Maine. I had 13 children in the whole school, K to 6. And I wanted to set a book there, so here I'm on the ferry, and I have my notebook, and I'm writing down sensory details, what I see or smell or hear. But I'm also listening to the people around me, like what kind of conversations people have on a ferry. The bottom picture, I am in a kayak, because in Half a Chance, the kids go kayaking quite a bit in the story, and that's something I love to do. So I'm in the kayak, I have my notebook, I lay the paddle across the front there, and I'm writing down things like what muscles I feel myself using as I'm paddling, what kind of smells are coming up off the water, what does the air feel like that close to the water. All those details are going in my notebook. I don't ever know if I'm going to use them, but I just collect everything I possibly can in case I need it. I also write at home. I have a regular house, but this is the shed that's out in my backyard where I do a lot of my writing. This is the present that I bought myself when Rules won a Newbery Honor, was this shed. Thank you. Honestly, it is the best money I spent on my career, has been this shed, because it's just for me, just me and the dog go out there. It's small, but I knew that if I got a bigger one, I would fill it with distractions. So by keeping it small, it means I can't bring things out there that are just going to distract me. I can't have a couch, I can't, just a desk, a chair, some bookshelves, really. It doesn't always look quite like that, because I live in Maine. So sometimes it looks more like that. I also have a lot of little notebooks that I bring with me whenever, everywhere. So I have one in my purse, I have one in my suitcase, I have a whole bunch around the house, I have one in the glove compartment of my car, because you never know when you're going to get a good idea. Or sometimes I'm driving and I see a really interesting name on a mailbox, and I think I love that name, I'm going to collect that name in case I can use it sometime. So I always have these little notebooks. And I'm a firm believer as a writer that if you surround yourself with things that have meaning to you, that meaning will go into your writing because it goes into you as you're writing it. One of the things, my dad passed away a few years ago, and one of the things that he did his whole life, because he loved numbers, was he used to collect numbers. I think they probably had to do with the stock market or something, but I don't really know what they were. And he had all these little memo books that he would fill the first maybe 30 pages of it with these strings of numbers, and the rest would be blank. And for whatever reason, then he would need to start a new one. And so he had probably 100 of these collected over his whole lifetime. And when my mom said to me, what would you like of your dad's? I said, I want those notebooks. So those are the notebooks that I bring with me. When I'm signing books or I'm out collecting details, it feels like I bring him with me. I also have to do a lot of learning as an author. Authors aren't perfect. I am not very good at commas, for example. Thankfully, I have an editor who helps me, but it's also my job not to just let her correct things for me, but to learn it myself and to grow as a writer and to reach deeper. And believe me, I do a lot of it. This is a page from Rules with all my editor's comments on it. Every page is going to come back to me looking like this, because it is her job to get the very best book out of me that I am capable of. And it's funny, when I show this page, I get two very different reactions. Kids feel sorry for me. But when I'm speaking to a group at like a library visit or something with just the general public, sometimes there will be a person in the audience who's affronted on my behalf. And they will say, oh, did you mind that she wanted to make all those changes? But she said, I don't ever mind. She and I are on the same team. She is trying to get the best of me that I'm capable of, and sometimes that's a lot of work. But just for fun, I'll show you what a few of the things on this page are that she's going to nail me on every time. Like, for example, right here, she circled the word down, and she circled it right there. That's because my editor never wants to see the same word twice on a page. The, a, and, said, the characters' names, I can use those more than once. But the fact I've got down on here twice, she's going to circle them if she sees them and ask me to change one. That's because if you use the same word over and over, you're not telling the reader something new, and she wants something new on every single page. And then I get this symbol a lot. Here, 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 here. It's the delete symbol. And what she'll do there, she'll look at every sentence of mine for any words she thinks I don't need. She'll put those in parentheses and make the delete symbol, telling me I can just get rid of it. Because if you write a long sentence, it's often full of those little filler words that don't mean very much, but they take up space, and that slows your story down. So whenever she's looking to cut things, it's to keep the pace strong. And then she asks me questions on the sides. This one says, this is what she wants to do. What does she do? And then every now and then I get the smiley face. You see it? I live for that smiley face. Because if you get 150 or 200 pages that all look like that, it is still a relief to think you've done something right. So it's a good reminder to me that we're working with kids' work or we're working with each other's work to be gentle and give some of those smiley faces as well as what the person can work harder on. Now when kids see this, sometimes they see failure. It's hard not to look at revision as failure if you expected to only do one draft and now you have to do another one. But the truth is revision is part of the process always. If I write 20 books My 20th book is going to look just like that when it comes back, because it is just part of the process of doing a book. And I love this quote by Naomi Nye about revision. She said, "If a teacher told me to revise, I thought that meant my writing was a broken down car that needed to go to the repair shop. I felt insulted. I didn't realize the teacher was saying, make it shine. It's worth it." So that's the words I put in my head when these pages come back. First I get scared, because it's very scary to get these pages. And then I say, make it shine. It's worth it. And the last word is dream. I was a great daydreamer as a child. Sometimes I used to make up in my head sequels for the books I loved but didn't have a sequel. And I think all that daydreaming has a purpose, and it's interior storytelling. So I tell kids that when you're daydreaming, pay attention to what that's about, because it often is telling you what would be a good story for you to write on. It's telling you what you're excited and you're passionate about. Now I'm going to prove to you, though, that I have always been that dreamer. Here's what it says on my second grade report card. It's still true. But the nice thing about dreaming, though, is that every now and then it comes true. When you win the Newbery Medal, you get an actual medal. I tell kids about the size of the palm of your hand. And when you win a Newbery Honor, you get second place, you get a plaque. And one of the nice things about the Newbery Honor plaque is that it's very durable. And so if I have a group of about 100 kids or less, because otherwise not everybody gets a turn, I will bring it with me to a school visit, and I will pass it around. And I will tell the kids that it shows me the powerful combination of wishing and work together, and also that dreams can come true, because that was a dream of mine. And I tell them if they want to, when it's their turn, they can put their hand on the seal and make a wish for their dreams, whatever they're about, to come true too. And you know, when I first started doing that, I thought, I don't know if kids will actually do this. Like those 8th graders, are they going to think this is stupid? And boy, there's nothing worse than an 8th grader who thinks something you're doing is stupid, right? But I took that risk, and I just passed it to that first kid, and you know what? Almost every one of them, even the most, hardened sort of kids in the audience, wish on it. And there's something so powerful about being the speaker and just seeing that one kid who's having a turn with it, and they've got their hand on the seal and their eyes are shut. And you just want to ask them what they're wishing about, but I don't ever do it because it's a private, secret thing and it's all for them. I'm going to talk about rules and a handful of stars. Rules is the one most people are most familiar with, and then a handful of stars is my newest book. It came out in May. But first about rules, and I'm going to tell you a story. Rules won its Newbery Honor back in 2007 in January, and in March I did my first presentation as a Newbery Honor author. And it was in the town of Portland, Maine, which is near where I live. And I gave my talk, and then I was signing books, and I looked up, and next in line was a little girl. She was about 10 years old, and she was holding rules just like this against her chest, staring at me. And I remember thinking, I don't even know if that child's going to give me that book. But I said, would you like me to sign your book? And she said yes, and told me her name was Hannah. So I turned to the title page, and I was signing to Hannah, and she came over and she whispered in my ear. And what she said was, I have a brother with autism. And that's what Rules is about. And I said, oh, Hannah, well, then you understand. And she went just like this. So I signed her book, To Hannah Who Understands. And that's how I sign all siblings now if they'd like me to, but she was the first one. She and I had a nice little conversation, and she and her mom went, on their way. But there was another lady with them, and she stayed behind. And she introduced herself to me as Hannah's librarian. And she said, when I saw you were speaking, I called Hannah's mom and said, we have got to take her to this. Because she has been floating with excitement ever since she started Rules. She's made the whole staff at school read it. And with everyone she gave it to, she said, this book is about me. And I think that story touches me so much because I know what she means. I have had that experience where I've opened a book and expected a story and instead found myself. And so I'll tell you that no shiny sticker, no amount of book sales touches those kind of moments for me. That is the Holy Grail. When you realize that you have created a book that is so important to some other one, and that especially when that person is a child. Now, a story starts when you get your first idea, and it began with a question my daughter Julia asked me one day. I have two kids. My daughter Julia is in the white t-shirt there. She's 26 years old, and she is in graduate school now of library science to become a librarian. Oh, you know Mama's proud of that. And my son Gregory is on the other side there. Greg is 23 years old, but when he was 2 years old, he was diagnosed with autism. And our world changed completely with that word. And one day when Julia was about 10, she came and she said to me, "Mom, how come I don't ever see families like ours in books and on TV?" And I thought, oh, that can't be true. I've been a teacher. I know there are books out there that include people with disabilities and their families. And this was in about the year 2000. And I went looking for those books for her. And when I read them as a mom of someone with autism, I realized that most of the books were very, very sad. And it's sad at my house every now and then, not usually. It is hilarious to live with my son. Because he says those things that you and I think, but we don't quite dare say. And it is inspiring. He works a lot harder than I do for many things. And you know, sometimes it's frustrating or it's disappointing. It is everything it is to live in any family. So I think I was trying to write the book that Julia couldn't find. And so I created a main character named Catherine. Catherine is 12 years old, and she has a little brother, David, who's 8, and David has autism. And Catherine loves her brother. But she also wishes sometimes he'd understand things a little easier, and she wouldn't have to keep explaining them. So that's why she writes her rules or little sentences about how the world works and how people behave. And some of them were just regular family rules, like you probably even said to your kids, like the one, say thank you when you get a present, even if you don't like it. But when you have someone in your family with autism, you realize how complicated we all are. And the rules, like sometimes people laugh when they like you, but sometimes they laugh to hurt you. And it's those kind of rules that my son has an extra hard time with, because you learn it by watching other people, and that's not usually a strength of people with autism. So that's where the idea for this story came from. My special love in writing that book was to thinking of siblings, not just the child with a disability, but the brothers and sisters, because that's a very hard road sometimes. Because that child with a disability gets a lot of attention and needs to. And especially if it has anything to do with safety skills, as it does in my son's case, you can't, as a mom, ever put that child last, because you don't know what's going to happen if they make a mistake. Like, just an example, one day, my son loved audio tapes when he was little cassette tapes, audio tapes, just like David does in the story. And my son understood that it needed power to go, and that oftentimes with power, you plug a plug into the outlet. And he was maybe 4 or 5, and one day, he was just in the next room, and I walked around the corner, and he had taken the headphone jack and put it into the wall. I don't know why he didn't get electrocuted, but you just need a few experiences like that as a mom to make you never quite comfortable with not putting that child first. So my daughter would say, "Will you play a game with me?" And I would say, "Yes, I want to. Let me just see what your brother's doing. Or let's sit here so I can watch what he's doing." And you know, that's really hard for a brother or sister. It's the way it has to be. But as a mom, it kind of breaks your heart. And then one day I noticed when she was about 5 that she was trying to get a lot of attention through him. And I realized that the professionals in our life, because you have so many professionals in your life when you have a little person with a disability, and she had to come to all those appointments with me because she was 5, but they kept saying things to her like this: "You are such a good sister. He is so lucky to have you. You could help him with this." And you know what? If you only hear that every now and then, it's a great thing. But if it becomes the main message that people in power are saying to you, there's another message that comes right in the shadow of those pretty words, and it's you matter through him. And I remember how hard it was one day. We're having one of those meetings with his professional team, and I had to say to them, I love that you talk to her. Please don't stop doing that. But when you talk to her, if it could be about her, I would really appreciate that. And you know what, to their credit, every single one of them did it, but they needed that reminder. So sometimes people will say to me, give us some good tips on how to help families like yours. And I'll say, you know what, give the siblings some extra attention. Because every parent that I know feels great guilt and worry about that sibling. And when anyone does something special for them, we just love it. So that's my big advice there for you. I am never more proud than when I get emails like this from this little girl named Grace, 10 years old. This is all she wrote. I was so scared. I was the only person who felt this way. Because if you have a brother who is not disabled, you get to complain. You get to say, my brother's being a jerk. And we'll give you a little judgment for that. But now imagine that brother's in a wheelchair or has severe autism. If you say, my brother's a jerk, you hear a different message. And it's often things like, oh, well, think of how it is for him, honey. You could be more understanding, things like that. So it's a kind of a tough road sometimes. And I get a lot of mail from siblings because it's a hard conversation to start with your parents. Every sibling wants to be fine because they don't want to give their parents any more things to deal with. But one of the things I'm proudest about Rules is it opens the door to that conversation, and those feelings don't have to get squashed down. They can just come out and be talked about. I gather a lot of details from my book, so I use those notebooks, and I go and I write down sensory details of what I'm seeing and smelling and hearing, but I pay special attention to anything that surprises me. Because here's my rule for description. The surprises you couldn't have imagined often become the gold in the description. Here's one of the settings from Rules. One of the things that happens in that book is that Catherine, the main character, she and her mom take her little brother David, who has autism, to a clinic where he has an occupational therapy appointment. And while they're there, they meet other people who have appointments at the same time, including a boy named Jason. Jason has 2 disabilities. He has cerebral palsy, and he's in a wheelchair, but he also can't talk. So he has a communication book that sits on the front of his wheelchair full of words and pictures, and he touches the words to have a conversation. And he and Catherine become very good friends. And one day, Jason and Catherine are in the waiting room having a conversation, and Jason admits to Catherine that sometimes when he's asleep, he dreams he can run. And he asks her, what does that feel like to run? And she tries to tell him, and then she says, is that how it felt in your dream? And he says, no. And she feels so bad that he doesn't even get to feel that feeling when he's asleep, that she does what we do sometimes when we don't know what to say, but we want to say something. She makes a joke. And she says, I could take you out in the parking lot and push you really fast. And he touches his communication book, and she looks over, and his finger's on the card that says, okay. So then she feels like they have to do it. She goes out in the parking lot, gets behind his wheelchair, and runs him around the cars. And when I was writing that scene, I knew it was the most important scene in the whole book because she's very embarrassed about his disability, and here she's going out in public with him. And I thought, I have to find those little surprising details that will bring this to life. Because if I'm walking, my eyes are up here. You look down to make sure you're not going to trip, but mostly you look up here. Now just imagine for a moment that you are going to push someone in a wheelchair. And think about where your eyes would spend most of their time. Down there. You look up to make sure you wouldn't run into something, but there's going to be things on the ground that you're going to have to go around or over. You're going to make a lot of decisions based on the ground and the wheels. So I thought, okay, I have to go to some place, go to a parking lot, something with wheels, and just wheel it around the parking lot to see everything she would have had to pay attention to. I didn't have a wheelchair. And when I tell this story to kids, I make them guess. I say, what could I have brought? And they're like, a wagon? I say, yeah, a wagon would have worked. A bicycle? Bicycle would have worked. What I brought was a rollerboard suitcase, kind with wheels. And I pulled up the handle, I went all around the parking lot. Paying attention to anything I had to go over or around or through. Like if I were here, I would have gotten to that cord on the floor and I would have said to myself, what would Catherine have done? Would she have bumped him over this? Would she have gone out around? And all the things that I asked myself those questions for ended up as those details in the book. And it was so funny because my daughter was about 14 at the time and she came with me. She was so embarrassed. Because here's her mom. And she said, Mom, it looks like you're running away from home. But I'm so glad I did that, because if I had just imagined a parking lot, I would have imagined something perfectly flat. And when I got to that real parking lot, it was anything but flat. And all those details came into the story because I actually kind of acted it out. And if it's a safe thing for me to do that, I will often act out a scene to try to get those details. Now the cover. Most of you probably know that authors don't get to decide the covers. Every publisher has an art department, and it's their job to do the covers. And so as an author, you really kind of cross your fingers and hope you're going to like what they come up with. My editor's favorite rule in the book was no toys in the fish tank, because the little brother David drops toys in their family fish tank, and it annoys Catherine, and she makes him that rule. So my editor walked into the art department Scholastic and said, give me a cover that shows no toys in the fish tank. And this is what they came up with. And I loved it, because my deep, dark fear was that they would put something kind of sad on the cover, like an empty park bench. That was my worst fear. So the fact, because oftentimes, especially back then, covers for those books were pretty dreary looking. And it was funny and bright, and I loved it, but I had a huge problem. And the problem was the duck. I didn't have any ducks in my book at all. The way that art director put it together was she went looking at stock photos that she could buy the rights to for a fish and a toy. She found a photo of a fish that she liked. She looked for a photo of a toy that would look good with it. She bought the rights to both. There were two different photographers. She was using something like Photoshop. She put them together, added the color, words, waterline. That was the cover. And I looked at this cover and I thought, kids are going to expect to find a duck in here. So I looked at all the toys I had picked for David to drop in the fish tank, and I looked for the time that I thought was the most important time he did it. And that's when he did it in front of one of Catherine's friends, and she was embarrassed. And I traded the toy I had picked for a ducky to match the cover. So if you read rules, all the other toys that David drops in the fish tank, they are all toy people. And that was true for the whole book when I wrote it. It was a pirate that I had chosen. But I got a duck on the cover, so I made that change. So not only did I not choose the cover, I changed the story to fit the cover. But the funny thing is, I didn't have anything to do with the duck. People give them to me all the time. In fact, in my gift basket at the hotel, there were 5 more. I stopped counting a year and a half ago at 350. And now I'd like to tell you a little bit about my new one, A Handful of Stars. This is the cover for that book. I do a lot of school visits, and I do them all over the country, but I also do quite a few in the state of Maine, where I live. And way down east in Maine, if you go along the coast all the way almost to Canada, there's a big county called Washington County, and it is full of wild blueberries. Nobody ever planted them. They just grow wild there. But every year they're harvested. They grow in huge barrens like this. Those are all blueberries in there. And I was doing a school visit in Machias, which is down in that part of Maine. And when I come home, sometimes I like to pick a different route that I've never seen before, just so I can see different parts of the state. And so I took this little road that cut between 2 other roads and went mainly through the woods. So I'm driving on this little tiny road through the woods, and there's, I'm looking out for moose and turkeys and all the things you look out for when you're driving through the woods. And all of a sudden, the woods opened up, on these beautiful blueberry barrens. And right in the middle of the barrens was a village of little blue houses. And this is what it looked like. And I realized that that was the camp for the migrant workers who come and rake the blueberries every year from the end of July to mid-September. And I started to think about the kids that I knew who had been migrant workers, the kids who live in that area, and right in the middle of this village, I saw a playground. And I thought, wow, this is where these children live. And so it really went into my heart, and a story came out of it. And the main character's name is Lily. She lives in that area with her French-Canadian grandparents, Meme and Pepe, and her blind dog, Lucky. And one day, Lucky slips his collar, and he's running out across those blueberry barrens, full tilt, and Lily is terrified that if he gets to the woods, he's going to run straight into a tree. And so she's running after him, yelling every word that dog knows and loves. Come, leash, bacon, go for a ride, cheese. You know, like you do when you're running after your dog, right? And he's not stopping for anything. And a girl who is raking blueberries, who's Lily's age, looks up, Selma, and sees him. And she grabs her backpack and starts to run. And as she's running, she pulls out a peanut butter sandwich and a bag of chips. And as Lily says, Lucky wasn't listening to Come or any of his other favorite words, but the crinkle of that chip bag pulled his ears right back. And then the girls become friends, and each wants to help the other with something important to her. And for Lily, that's wanting to afford an operation on Lucky's eyes. And for Selma, it's wanting to enter the Down East Blueberry Queen pageant, because that comes with a savings bond. But no migrant worker has ever entered the pageant before, and to be first at anything takes a lot of courage. Selma in the story is an artist, and she leads Lily to appreciate art throughout the story. So I let artists inspire me for the story. And the first artist I used for this story was a photographer named David Brooks Stess, who lives in New York City during the wintertime, and in the summer comes and rakes blueberries. And he gets the most amazing photographs because he is doing the work of everybody else. So he gets these intimate, amazing photographs of the people who do that work. When I do this with kids, I show them these two photos and I say, use your writer's eye now and tell me everything you notice, anything at all. And they will look at the top picture and they'll say, I see a 46. And I'll say, well, what does that tell you? They'll say, there's at least 46 buildings. And then they'll say at the bottom photo, they'll say, the men are laying down and the boy is standing up, and the men don't have any blankets and the boy doesn't have any shirt on. And I'll say, well, tell me, what do you think that means? They'll say, well, it's probably really hot out, or maybe they don't have blankets. And then somebody will eventually say, there's no screen in the window. And I'll say, well, what happens if you don't have a screen in the window? Well, then the rain comes in or the bugs come in, right? And then finally someone will say, I notice it's only painted on the outside. And I'll say, what do you think that means? Maybe they ran out of paint. It's expensive to buy paint. Maybe they didn't have enough. Or maybe they care, what the person who made that decision cares more what people on the outside think than what people on the inside think. Now, as a writer, it's not my job to draw all those conclusions. It's my job to lay it out for you, and then the reader draws the conclusions. So here's the description. On the outside, the cabin was painted light blue, but inside there were only 4 bare wood walls, the beams all showing. And then another photographer that I fell in love with for this book, his name is Fred Levy, and he lives in Massachusetts. And he learned kind of an upsetting fact about animal shelters, and that is that black dogs often are adopted last. And I know that that is true at the shelter where I volunteer too. I don't know why, but people tend to walk right by the black animals. And it's not just dogs, it's cats, rabbits, anything that's a black animal, they just don't notice it. And I think maybe it comes from the really old days where we thought black cats were unlucky. So I determined that I was going to put a black dog in this book, and his name was going to be Lucky. But Fred Levy takes these amazing photos, and he uses a black background to force you to see how beautiful they are. They can have a little white, but mostly black. Isn't that stunning? He also takes photographs of black dogs who are disabled. And so this became the description of Lucky, was from the photographs he took. It's like someone just traded out his sparkling black eyes and left blue marbles instead. And then there's an essay and art contest every year for the Association of Farm Worker Opportunity Programs for migrant and seasonal farm worker children. And these were the winners in 2010 for art. The words say, "I started by picking rocks in a field, and one day I will be an artist." And that's where Salma's love of art came from when I saw this. I will often take real things because they bring that realness into the story with them. And then I loved this one too. It's the same year. The words say, "Dream big in true colors," and she's sleeping on a bedspread made of crops. But what she's dreaming of in her little dream bubble is graduation things, like a mortarboard and a diploma. Because every migrant child that I met knew their way out of that life was education. It's so hard to get a good education when you're only 3 months in any particular place. This book also has a lot to do about bravery. And one day, I had to go do something that I was kind of scared to do. I'm brave about some things and not about others, but I was going to have to do one of those scary things. And I was at the stoplight waiting to go to this event, and a thought came into my head, and I grabbed one of the little notebooks, and I wrote it down, and this is what I wrote. "I only feel a little bit braver than I feel scared, but really, that's all you need." And that's become the whole theme in this book. Because when we think of bravery, sometimes we think of people who do these amazing, hugely brave things, and they're not scared at all. But you don't have to be brave if you're not scared. It's that little bit of extra brave that allows you to do brave things. And I'm going to tell you a story where I'm embarrassed to tell you, but I'm going to do it anyway. This book came out in May, but in about January, I had ARCs for the book, Advanced Reader Copies, and I had done a school visit at a school in Maine right before my ARC arrived, and I told the kids all about this book. And so I wrote to that teacher, and I said, I really have to have this back because it's the only one I have, but if you would like to take a couple weeks and read it to your kids, they were really excited about it, and I would be glad to loan it to you. And then I said words that I wish I had never said. But I felt a little bit uncomfortable about the fact that all of my other novels had a girl and a boy in them, and this book only had 2 girls. And there was no strong boy character in the whole book, really, that was a kid. And so I said the words, "But it's kind of a girl book." I know, I'm sorry. And she said, she told the boys that, and the boys said they didn't care, they wanted to hear it anyway. So she read it to her class, and then those boys took me to task. They wrote me letters. The first one says, "A Handful of Stars is really good. It's an okay boy book." And the bottom one says, "Our 5th grade class just finished A Handful of Stars by you. Our teacher said that you were wondering how boys will take this book. I'm a boy, and I loved the book. The big lesson that I got out of the book is that life is all about friendship." I don't ever say those words again. And partly because I don't think we ever want to send the message to boys that girls' experiences don't matter to them, or vice versa. And we don't want to exclude kids by saying this is a book for somebody when it could be a book for everybody. So I think a good book is for everybody. And I mean everyone. Thank you. And that comes home to me very clearly in this photo. I did a launch for this book up in Millbridge, Maine, which is right smack in the middle of blueberry country in Maine, and the whole school turned out for it. I had 300 people come to this launch, and the little kids sang bee songs, and the kids made projects, and I love this grandpa. He got there early because the kids were practicing. He's got a purse by his feet, so I think his wife probably said, "You watch my pocketbook while I go help." And he had nothing to do, and he sat there and read the entire book. And then he came up and told me how much he enjoyed it. Now, if you said to me, "Cynthia, Lorde, who is your audience?" That's not who I think of. But it can be. But the best part of being an author, always, is readers. There's Milo, some of the mail that comes to me. I would like to end by sharing just a couple letters with you from kids, because I think sometimes you give a book to a kid and they come back and tell you about it. And other times you give a book to a kid and it is so powerful and personal to them that they have to tell a stranger, not someone they love, and they will write to me instead. So I'm going to read you 3 of those letters, but I'm going to start with a very short one that is my other kind of mail, which is the kind of mail where sometimes they have to write to the author, or in our internet age, they will write to get their homework questions answered. Did you know they do that? They do. And sometimes they're a little sneaky about it, and I'm not really sure, and I always err on the side of, kindness with them, but other times they are not sneaky at all, like this child. Dear Cynthia Lorde, I enjoyed reading your book, Rules, so did everyone in my class. Do you think Catherine's rules are helpful or hurtful to David? Please support your answer. Your number 1 fan. Now, I'm an ex-teacher, and I taught 6th grade as one of the grades I taught, and so I wait at least a month before I answer those. Because I know that assignment came due. But then there are more heartfelt ones that just are the reasons we all do what we do. And I'm going to show you this one in her handwriting because I feel like it's really powerful to see it in her own hand. Dear Mrs. Lorde, hi, I'm Emily Bailey. I'm 11 years old and I live in North Carolina. I read your book Rules for 2 reasons. 1, my friend recommended it, and 2, my older sister has autism. I really enjoyed your book because I could really understand what Catherine was feeling. Growing up with my sister has taught me a lot. In fact, her love of writing has brought me to love it too. But sometimes the way Mom gets mad at her for lying or breaking something makes me feel scared. Also, I'm 11 and she's 14, and I'm the one that has to make sure that she makes it home from school, not the other way around. I know that we'll never be able to talk about personal stuff either. Some things you just don't want to talk to your mom about, And I'm afraid that people are teasing her behind my back. That really makes me mad. I wrote to you because I wanted to tell someone who knows how I feel. And I was wondering if you had any advice for me to feel proud of her and not ashamed. Also, if you could send me a list of books you think are good, that would be great. But you don't have to. Sincerely, Emily Bailey. P.S. Please excuse the spelling if there are any mistakes. I'm bad at that. Rules will be 10 years old this year. On April 1st, it'll be 10 years old. And so the kids who read it when it first came out in 2006 are now in college. And I met some of those kids while I've been here. They came up and said, I read this when I was young. No. And every now and then, I get a letter from a college student. And it's one thing to have a book that matters in the moment, and it's another thing to see that you've written a book that matters for that person's lifetime. And it's such a big honor when that happens, like this one. Hello, Mrs. Lorde. My name is Athena, and I know you have many fans, but we have spoken via email before. The last time I wrote you, I was about 12 years old, and now I'm a sophomore in college. About 6 years ago, your book Rules helped me through the process of coping with my brother's death, who indeed had autism. I have a little sister who only got to know my brother for 2 years of her life, and now she is asking questions. Is 10 years old and asking questions. The experience is very emotional, at the same time eye-opening, and I was thinking about writing a book about it. I was wondering if you could give me some pointers on where to start. I don't see myself making a career out of writing, but I want to share this experience with the world and maybe touch someone's heart, much like you did mine. I've read Rules 47 times. I haven't read Rules 47 times. It helps me on my brother's birthday, and it helps me on his death date. I think I can do such a thing as writing a novel. What do you think? And I wrote back, and of course I said, yes, yes, yes. You must do that. And then this last one is about a handful of stars. There was a teacher, a gifted and talented teacher in Louisiana who has a student named Emily who lost her mother a year ago. And in A Handful of Stars, Lily's mother has died, and she thinks about that sometimes. And this little girl, Emily, never talks about her mother, has never written about her. But she liked my other books and started A Handful of Stars and got to the point where Lily's thinking about her mom and couldn't go on. And this teacher's so wonderful. She said, "We'll read it together." And so the two of them took turns going back and forth. One would start crying, the other one would pick it up, and they got through those chapters. And then something kind of sad for me happened in that this gifted and talented teacher said, you can take the AR test on this because their school does that for points. And Emily said, "I can't, it's below my level. It doesn't count." And I thought, I get the AR system, and as a teacher, I know that sometimes you have to have some things, but if you're going to stretch a child, that child was so stretched by that book, and it broke my heart that she couldn't get credit for it in the way that her peers were getting some credit. So I went out to my little writing shed, and I got one of my copies of the book. I signed it to her as a prize. I looked around, I saw little star catchers of the stars. I sent her one of those, and I sent her the rock that you saw earlier that says a little bit of brave on it. I used to carry that in my pocket when I was working on this book to remind myself that that's what this book was all about. So I sent her those 3 things. And then she wrote back to me, and she sent me a rock. And as I was unwrapping the 12 miles of tissue paper she had around it, I wondered to myself if she had written something on the rock like I had. And she had, and the word was faith. And then she entered the Letters About Literature contest, which is a contest for kids by the Library of Congress, where you write to the author of a book who's somehow the book has changed your life. And it really doesn't have to do with the authors. You can write to Charles Dickens if you want to. But she wrote a letter to me for that contest, and her teacher sent it to me. And I'd like to just read it to you. Dear Cynthia, Lorde, I discovered the book A Handful of Stars after my teacher recommended it to me. I read the back and just fell in love with it immediately. You know when a book is special to me because I don't like many books, but this one particularly touched my heart. In the book, I can relate to Lily because sometimes I feel like my drawing is bad. Sometimes I feel like my drawing is bad because when I draw, some people say it is bad or ugly, or you can do better than that. I pretend that it doesn't affect me, but it really does. And after reading A Handful of Stars, I realized that everyone's drawing is different, and everyone has their own opinion, and I, as an artist, have learned to respect that. Like Lily, I had a loss in my family, too. 1 year ago, my mom died, just like Lily's did. Lily and I both used art to comfort ourselves. One thing that I have recently noticed is that we don't like to talk about the tragedy, and when we do, it brings down our confidence. But I keep my head up high because of this quote from the book. You only have to be a little bit braver than you are scared. You, Cynthia Lorde, have given me a little more brave. I just want to end by saying thank you. Because I'll tell you that the best book in the world does not matter if it doesn't reach the audience that it is intended to. And you do that for our books and make them matter. And I just, I feel bad when I travel the country and sometimes I don't see teachers respected the way they should be and librarians respected the way they should be. So let me just say thank you as a mom, as an author, and as that child I used to be. Thank you so much.